50 people have been killed and more than 150 wounded in 2 days of tribal clashes in southern Libya. It comes as the country is faced with continued violence, with former rebels still carrying arms a year after the revolution that toppled longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi. Well, for more on this, we're joined live now by freelance journalist and blogger Neil Clark, live from Oxford in the UK. Thanks for joining us here on RT. The National Transitional Council was created to rebuild Libya after Gaddafi, but dozens have just died in 2 days of clashes, and the deputy chairman of the NTC has stepped down. So is the new government actually failing to meet its goals?
I think it's massively failing to achieve its goals, and let's look back to when the NTC took power last year. They promised peace, democracy and human rights in Libya. We've actually had the very opposite. There is no peace in Libya. In addition to the 50 people killed over the last 2 days, in February over 100 people were killed. Human rights, well, there's been appalling attacks on black Africans, there's been ethnic violence, racist violence, unpunished. I mean, the people who committed these crimes have been unpunished. There's been desecration of British war graves in Benghazi. Again, the people who did that are unpunished. The fact is the NTC is not in control of the country. There's lawlessness going on, and the country is in a real mess.
Now, an NTC representative in Sabha, where the clashes took place that you mentioned, has also resigned, saying that the council isn't doing enough to stop the violence. But what more could they possibly do to stop the bloodshed?
Well, the fact is they're in a very difficult position. The main problem is that Libya is awash with arms. And who's to blame for this? Well, it's the Western powers who gave these arms to rebels to topple Gaddafi. And the fact is now you've got militias, you've got different tribal militias, all heavily armed. You've got a very weak, divided government in Tripoli that is not in control of its territory. And so you've got a real recipe for anarchy at the moment. So it's very hard to see what else they can do.
Sorry, I mean, these clashes between rival tribes and militias, do you think they've become more frequent since the new council took office compared to the Gaddafi regime?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Gaddafi regime took power in 1969 and was in power till 2011. That's 42 years. It was only in the last few months that actually violence of this scale broke out. And that, of course, was stoked up by the Western powers who were after regime change in Libya. And, you know, Gaddafi was a strong man. He was a dictator. He kept the country together because he did try to unify his very divided country, which is divided on on tribal grounds. And he did try to unify the people. So in the 41 years of Gaddafi's rule, nothing like this took place. And already Libyans are getting nostalgic for the days of Gaddafi because there is lawlessness there, and it's very similar to what's happened in Iraq.
Now, the rebels are still armed, as you say, yet most of them seem uninterested in joining the police or armed forces. How will the new government get them to promote peace and lay down their arms? How's it going to happen? It's
going to be very, very hard for them to do that, and I'm afraid that the future of Libya doesn't look very good at all. I think the model is, of course, Iraq, because in Iraq the same thing happened. A secular regime was toppled by the West, and the West deliberately stoked up ethnic and tribal divisions in the country. They armed various groups, and I mean, now we see what's happening there. We've got bombs going off in Iraq on a regular basis, anarchy, and I think that's what lies in store for Libya.
So what can we expect for the future of Libya then, in your opinion, with the National Transitional Council appearing unable to put an end to the violence?
Well, I'm afraid it's not good news. I think we have to look at Iraq and see what happened there. And, you know, the interesting point about all this, Carrie, is the Western position. Let's think back to 12 months ago. There was the propaganda in the Western media, the news channels about we must intervene in Libya for human rights and democracy. They had this so-called humanitarian intervention, and what's happened? From a humanitarian aspect, things have got a lot worse. And the fascinating thing is Russia Today is actually covering the situation today in Libya, but the main Western news channels are not covering the story in the same way they don't cover Iraq. For them, it's the end of the story, Gaddafi's gone, and they're really not interested in reporting what's going on, which is a human rights catastrophe. We're seeing ethnic violence, we're seeing racism against black Africans, but for the West, it doesn't matter. They got what they wanted, and they don't really care now.
OK, we'll leave it there. Live from Oxford, that was journalist, writer and blogger Neil Clark. Thank you for joining us here on RT.
Very much. Thank you.